Well, good morning, everybody. And no matter where you're at in this beautiful country, it is still actually morning, whether you're West Coast, Central, or East Coast. So I want to welcome you to the May podcast, The Long Term. I'm Angie Hughes. I'm going to hopefully talk about some things, but I first want to recognize the holiday that we just had, Memorial Day. Federal holiday here in the United States, honoring and mourning all of the military personnel that actually gave the greatest sacrifice in defending our great country that we live in. So I want to give a shout out to those that paid the ultimate price for this country and for the families that supported each and every one of them as they were doing so. And don't ever want to overlook that holiday because it's very important due to the ultimate sacrifice that was given. So with that, the title of my podcast for the month of May is Remember When. And I am still working with a lot of agents that maybe don't specialize in long-term care insurance, don't specialize in extended care planning, really just kind of come upon it when someone asks them, when a client says, hey, what about extended care? What about long-term care? Do you offer that? Is this something I should consider? So not really the first product line that most people go to. I don't work with what I would say long-term care specialists out there in the industry. So I find it to be very relevant in taking all of the solutions that we have at our disposal and trying to bring that to an easy conversation with a client, with a prospect. And I go into every single conversation as if I was talking to my mom about long-term care insurance. There's a lot of choices. So, right, that's the great thing is we are not just a one-trick pony, not one size fits all, but in the same breath, right, that makes it a little bit more complicated because we have so many choices out there today. And it's really difficult how do you bring that down without overwhelming your client, your prospect, the person that just wants a quick conversation about extended care planning? How do we get that done in a meaningful and impactful way, right? Moving them closer to a solution that's going to benefit them and their families when the event arises that they need help. And there's several people that have actually gone through and made this piece of paper that I have that I use. Honestly, I could probably do a 4-hour presentation on just one single sheet of paper, going through the different solutions that we have. Pension Protection Act actually opened up that gateway for us to say, hey, it's not just traditional long-term care insurance anymore. You actually can do a lot of different things to provide the right product. Now, what I find interesting is, not to date myself, but 25 years ago, when I got into this business, if you wanted a long-term care solution, you had a long-term care product, and we had a lot of long-term care products. Well, that's really kind of whittled down. And as you go to the ILTCI, which is the long-term care conference of the industry, where everybody gets together and we talk about anything and everything facing long-term care insurance, whether it's life insurance, it's chronic illness, it's traditional, it's short-term care, just anything that fits in that space. Traditional long-term care insurance is all we had several years ago, over 2 decades ago. And so now we've expanded into other solutions. But what I think is most interesting is it's not just that the consumer has more choice, but you as an agent have more choices. So how do you decide? And I can tell you, I've seen a change in the thought process, the selling options as our agents. 25 years ago, the agents that sold traditional long-term care insurance, a lot of those folks I worked with are retired. And so they're not keeping up with all of the changes that have happened. And the younger agents that are coming in, buying books of business, taking over the family business, maybe they're not as embracing of traditional long-term care insurance. Because remember, I said not my average agent is going to be wearing a long-term care hat. It's going to be more of, I offer other product lines, whether I'm, a financial planner, I'm running my own RIA, I'm a property and casualty agent, I'm running that business, and navigating around that. What if they're a fee-only agent? How do they look at these types of solutions? Do they fit that into their practice? Is it an important planning piece for them? So we've been able to expand our choices, but how has that helped? And when you think about your own practice, how do you make that decision? And so this one single sheet of paper that I have really goes through the pros and the cons. And I've seen this piece of paper go through, the industry. A lot of folks are using something like this, but is it long-term care insurance? Is it an asset-based product? Is it a linked benefit product where it's just a life insurance, no extension rider? Is it maybe a fixed or an indexed annuity? I will tell you, not on my piece of paper, just because of the securities around it, but you kind of got to take a moment to look that there's some VUL, there's some variable contracts out there right now that have some underlying guarantees on them when it comes to long-term care and or chronic illness riders. And then, of course, those without an insurance policy are self-funding that. And I'm not going to say that that's a horrible thing. There's reasons, right? And there's pros and cons to every single aspect of that. But I will tell you, when you're talking to your consumer, and I am so fortunate that a lot of the agents that I work with, because it's long-term care insurance is not their first line of defense, a lot of them always say, Angie, I need some illustrations. And then, are you available next Tuesday at 3? I'd like to get my client on the phone and let's just talk about it. I like that for 2 reasons, right? It allows me to kind of keep my finger on the hub of what the consumers are saying and what brings that conversation to the table, which most times most of the time it's because either their financial advisor said that they should be considering it, or it's because they've had an event in their own family and or their own health and they're wanting to look at it. So those are typically the drivers that I see that bring people to want to have these conversations. And so instead of going through the minutia of, well, here's traditional, here's asset-based, here's a linked benefit, here's an annuity, you're doing nothing at this time, this is self-funding, Medicaid's not free, but you need to understand how it works. That's too much information. That's just, paralysis by analysis when you're talking to a consumer. But you can 30,000-foot view these options for them, which allows them to kind of hone into what is important. And I will tell you, I never, ever miss an opportunity to talk about, are you a business owner at any stretch? Are you filing self-employment income, whether you're an S Corp, an LLC, sole proprietor, self-employed, any of that? Because I never want to miss an opportunity about talking about the tax deductibility, right? So it's a very jam-packed hour conversation, but usually they're going to come to terms in their mind about what they deem to be the right solution for them. They don't understand what goes into all of that. They're certainly not being shown illustrations, with 3 chronic illness riders and 3 traditional carriers, and then let's throw in a few LTCs on some guaranteed universal life insurance. They're not looking at all of that, because a lot of times the question at the top of their mind that they never ask right out the gate, but they always want to know is, how much does this stuff cost? I hear it's really expensive. Can be, certainly can be. I can spend as much or be as reasonable as you'd like when we're building a plan for you, because a plan for Mr. and Mrs. Jones isn't the same as a plan for Mr. and Mrs. Smith, because every client is different. Their assets are different, their income is different, their genetics, their family history, their health is different, right? And a lot of that lends itself to the carrier that you're going to go to. We are seeing, in the industry, and I think I'll probably go down with the ship as everybody says, traditional long-term care insurance is dying or dead. I don't know that I can get on board with that, because I find it to still be a very, very relevant and meaningful benefit to a lot of folks, not just because of a pricing and a premium perspective, but because they understand the leverage of the benefits they're going to get, right? So typically when you're looking at a life insurance solution, depending on if it's asset-based or if it's a linked benefit, the inflation can get a little clunky on that. And let's not forget, these are optional riders on those asset-based products. So innately, there is an internal cost to adding an inflation rider, no different than a cost to adding it to a traditional policy. But it's important to know when you're building these contracts, where do those price points fit for that client? So usually I like to start with just listening to them. I want to hear what's bringing this conversation to the table. I think, and I usually say that. I said, it makes me so excited that you want to have, Bob and Mary, you want to have a conversation about extended care planning, but tell me what's brought that to the table. And then I just sit there. And I love hearing the stories that they say, hearing what's important to them, because that's also factoring into their buying process. And that's really helping me bring down. You'll have some that have had a great experience with a parent's policy or a grandparent's policy that they had. You'll have some that don't have good experiences at all. This policy never paid. It was a piece of junk. I don't even know why they bought it, or they lapsed it because the rate increases went so high. And believe you me, on traditional products, you got to be pretty comfortable having a rate increase conversation, right? Because if you were to list the pros and the cons, that's probably the one thing that most people say about traditional long-term care insurance is, well, the premiums aren't guaranteed. Well, you can certainly overcome that. There are products out there that you can buy that will guarantee, whether you single pay or 10 pay, a traditional long-term care contract. And yes, those are still available out there today, but that's a way to overcome that. Now, will they gag when they see the price tag of that? Maybe. But again, still always worthy of the conversation. And then you'll have those that, a lot of times what I find is that financial advisors do like, and maybe it's just because it's a platform solution for them to offer the life insurance, whether it be the MoneyGuard, the Securian, the Nationwide, the One Americas, those products that are life insurance facing, but they have the long-term care rider on there. So you really buy it for the long-term care solution. You're just putting it on a life insurance chassis, which allows you to actually guarantee out those premiums. And I will tell you, if you wander into the life insurance space, which is just a linked benefit, right? I'm going to buy a life insurance, whether it's an IUL or a GUL. I'm going to buy that life insurance policy, and I'm just going to accelerate the death benefit. I got to tell you, the more you move into that very noisy space, good solutions, there are some good solutions, but they absolutely have to understand what they're buying. And I will tell you, if you've not dissected a chronic illness rider on how it works, truly works, that will be critical for you before you decide to just jump on the bandwagon, because you need to understand, if you're selling that as a long-term care solution, you better make sure you understand, how does that waiver of premium work? Or does it even work? Does it waive the premium for the long-term care rider, but not the life insurance piece, right? It's just not a waiver of premium across the board. Better yet, when you buy the policy and it says it's going to pay out a per diem on a monthly basis, or it's going to pay a 2% or a 4%, is that indexed? Meaning, does that benefit grow? If you buy a per diem amount, does that mean it's the per diem every year that policy has a per diem change? Or is it the per diem the year they bought the policy? So we can sit here and say, yeah, Angie, but I look at the chronic illness riders where it's a 2 out of 6 ADL or a severe cognitive impairment. There's a 90-day, whether it's consecutive or a calendar day. It's an indemnity-based chronic rider. I get all of that. Those are great things, but there is some minutia inside of them. And I do find that those are getting a lot of attention, probably because it's an, oh, by the way, a very inexpensive rider to add on a life insurance policy. But I will tell you, when I've gotten into some of the real moving parts, when your client goes on claim, those are worthy of a conversation up front, not when your client goes on claim, because somebody's going to be pretty upset if that policy doesn't work like we thought it would as a long-term care. So just some things that we got to be aware of instead of just stepping out. And a lot of times those chronic illness riders, I've never seen one that requires it, but on a chronic illness rider, you don't have to take any long-term care certification to sell that. So it's important that we know how those contracts work. And I'm all about looking at all the solutions, because sometimes the underwriting that I get from a life insurance policy is better than what I'll get from either a hybrid or an asset-based or traditional. So they're always worthy of looking at. It's just about how they're going to work. And so long as we're upfront and disclosing all of those components, then you shouldn't have a problem with that. It's just realizing, right, that people don't buy long-term care solutions for something that they're going to use tomorrow or 2 weeks or 2 months or 2 years down the road. It's 20 years down the road. And if any of you have had the experience of calling an insurance company that no longer actively sells long-term care insurance, and you get on the phone with a customer service, right? We're talking about policies sold 20, 30 years ago. The way those contracts worked are not how current day contracts work. And what's even more interesting is we're expecting somebody that wasn't even working at that insurance company at the time that policy form series was sold to understand how that contract works. That's not always a smooth process either. So just a lot of things that we have to, kind of keep in the top of our mind when we're looking at solutions. But I love the fact that you have choices. I think it's kind of made your process with your consumer just a little bit more of a challenge, because I think you need to be working with someone that will take the time after you've heard your client and what they want, and you take that back to your FMO or BGA or whoever it is that you're working with, that they understand the goal and it's not a one size fits all. That's very, very important, because nobody benefits from a policy that got declined. Nobody benefits from a bad experience. So it's really important that we try to do our best to get that client the best coverage for them that works for them, and it works for you as an agent as well. So I wanted to digress just a little bit on the annuities as well. We are seeing some uptick in annuities with long-term care, and I emphasize long-term care rider. There are some of them that are generating out up to 4 times leverage. And so if you've got folks that need limited underwriting, very few as 5 health questions, no phone interviews, no interruption to your client, and they've got a non-qualified annuity sitting out there with a bunch of gain in it, and you can 1035 that over into a true long-term care annuity. And if they need that money for care, none of it comes out taxable. And so although it might not be a very sexy interest rate appeal, that's really not the play on this. It's the fact that the Pension Protection Act allowed them to use monies even with gain, but if pulled out for long-term care services, there's no taxation to that person. And so that is a really, really powerful story. If you have a book of annuity business, but yet you don't have a book of long-term care, if you have clients that need to visit a possible 1035 exchange in solving a need for them so that everything else can stay put and work for them, that's maybe a conversation and some illustrations we should run for you, because it's something that is getting a little bit more of attention. That was really kind of all I've had for you this month. I will tell you, we've got some new product launches that are coming out. I've sent my feelers out to see if I can't get one of them on my June podcast. So mark your calendars. June 27th is the podcast for next month. And I'm hoping to bring to you a special guest that can talk about a new product launch that I think you're going to be very excited about. So stay tuned. And with that, I hope you all had a wonderful Memorial weekend. We're all back at it. Now we're getting ready to move into the summer months. So I know we've got vacations and kids are out of school. So I wish you all the very best, but don't forget my podcast is on demand as well. You can always catch the recording if you can't catch it live, and we'd love to have you do so. With that, have a wonderful day and a wonderful Tuesday. Take care, everyone.